I have friends in the military, and I read the other day that the Lansing National Guard returned from a year in Afghanistan. They would have been partnered with Canadian troops in that theater. Canada has had the longest deployment in its history in Afghanistan, more than 10 years we've had our soldiers in combat. So our relationship and the shared values and the shared sacrifices that we make are very, very deep. And sometimes we have to remind ourselves of that. Recently, I think we've seen some cracks in the relationship, some things that are worrisome to us. We had a senator suggesting that the Army be deployed along the northern border to secure the northern border with Canada, and some senior officials just a couple of weeks ago in the Senate were talking about the Canadian border as a very, very serious security threat. And I trace a lot of this to my observations about 9/11. And I'm going to make a couple of comments here. I want to say that I say all this with the greatest possible respect. I don't want to offend anybody. I know these are very hot-button issues even now. But at the time of 9/11, I was working in the aviation industry, and I had responsibility for security and especially passenger documentation. And in fact, I was at a security meeting in Britain at the time at Waterside when the attacks actually took place. And I returned to Canada a couple of days later to the most amazing, the most huge reaction you could see. Canadian people were as moved as ever have been in my life. There was a massive rally in Ottawa that was assembled in 24 hours with essentially no support from anybody, government. It was a ground up, just Canadians coming together. In the months that followed, I had a very front row seat on our security reaction, at least in the aviation industry. I was in Washington an awful lot, and a whole new tribe of officials began to appear who were security people and no previous experience with transportation. And I was one. I was involved in something called the Control Authority Working Group, a control authority being customs and police. And the Control Authority Working Group was one of the forums in which we discussed the security response. And we had everybody, all the developed world nations there, and we participated in a very, very sweeping overhaul of aviation security and passenger documentation to build a system which is now in place where, in fact, we built it in 2 years, where officials in the United States could see anybody getting on any plane heading to the United States and track them against all of the data that existed anywhere in U.S. data banks, assembled the don't-fly list in Canada and the United States at the same time. The cooperation that was present was enormous, and although Americans clearly and deservedly felt themselves to be the key target of that attack and all the other attacks, it should be remembered that a lot of nations suffered loss. That was the biggest mass killing of Canadians in my lifetime, except for the bombing of Air India, which is, of course, another terrorist attack from another cause. And we all felt that we had a dog in the fight, and since that time, many other nations have been victims of it. These terrorists are not only coming after America. Of course, that's the great Satan. That's their key target. But we all have lost people, and we all have been at risk. You know, they've killed in England, they killed in Spain. Before 9/11, the French stopped a terrorist attack on a jet that was supposed to crash into the Eiffel Tower, and they got it stopped when they attacked it in Marseille. In Canada, a few years ago, we arrested a bunch of people in a conspiracy to blow up the stock exchange. This threat is endemic. It's general. You've arrested a lot of terrorists and interrogated them, and we find that their assault is against an entire life, an entire lifestyle, and they like to target America, but they're not that discriminate. Well, why am I saying all this? Well, because we have a border between us, and security infuses everything we do at that border, and we have to work hard on this issue. And Karen was raising some of it recently. The President and the Prime Minister announced a working group on the future of the border and one on regulation, and we think that's very, very important, and we're very, very active on that file. We have to be looking at what a border is, what it does. If you think about a border, a lot of things are happening there. There's tariffs being levied, there's agriculture, there's immigration and so forth. Security is certainly the dominant idea on people's minds, but Borders are important. Between Canada and the United States, we move $1 million of product a minute. We have 300,000 people going across that border every day. Efficiency of that barrier is central to the northern United States and southern and Canada's economic efficiency. We have to make this work better than it is working. I was in Boeing's plant in Renton, Washington one time, and I don't know if any of you have ever been there. It's bigger than everything you've ever seen. It's the biggest, I mean, it's like several football fields. It's enormous. And they run around in a place with big plastic bins about the size of this thing on wheels, and they fill them up with parts, like $4 million worth of electronic motherboards in a plastic thing, and they run it around. It's just the most efficient way to get these products around among all these behemoth aircraft. And I thought to myself, what if you built that plant on the border? What if the frontier was right down the middle? How would you deal with that? You'd say, I'm going to take this box of widgets here, and I'm going to go and give them to Louis. He's right over there, and I just got to stop and fill out some forms, and somebody's going to inspect it, and we're going to check it out. It's going to take a little while, and then I'll get it over to Louis. Is going to send me back with a couple of motherboards, and I'm going to stop and fill out some forms, and someone's going to inspect it. It's just going to take a few minutes, and then I'm back here. A little later on, I got to go and see Wayne, and he's over there, and he needs these parts. Well, that's what we do. That's what we're doing now. We have an integrated industrial economy which has a big barrier in the middle, and every time we cross it, we go through this little, sometimes not so little, delay, cost, paperwork. We can't afford to do that anymore. We have to get better at it, and the way we have to get better at it, and the reason I wanked on all that time about security and shared responsibility, is to say we have to demand more of our security agencies than a barrier through which it is very difficult to go. That's not the goal. And nowadays, that cannot be the measure of their success. I have a lot of friends in the security community, but I'm not afraid to say this to them. They have to do better than that. And when you consider that, where was I? I was in Paris. I put my credit card in a bank, and 2 seconds later, I've got access to my account. I get my money. I can check on myself. Imagine the amount of work and the creativity that went to make that possible for me to have a secure access to my money. We need to expect more of security than the technology that George Washington would have deployed if he was defending a border. And of course, we need excellent infrastructure. And the infrastructure I have in mind right at the moment was built when Herbert Hoover was president. And for capacity and for security reasons, for the future of this state, for the future of our relationship with the state, we certainly do urge that the legislature approve the bill and get going on building the new bridge. Canada is